Okay. Very warm welcome to everyone for yet another discussion session on Talking Films Online, the online discussion group where we talk cinema. We are very happy to welcome a young film studies scholar in our midst today, who's also suggested the film Labor of Love, 2014. The film was suggested by Amrita Biswas, and Amrita is a PhD candidate in the configurations of film research collective at Goethe University, Frankfurt. She completed her MPhil in cinema studies at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU, Delhi. She received her BA from St. Xavier's College, Calcutta, in English, and then pursued her post-graduation in film studies from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. Her research interests include post-partition trauma in the films of Ritwik Ghatak, as well as media infrastructures of alternative and popular Bengali cinema. Her published work focuses on the Super 8 film movement and the culture of cinephilia in Kolkata. She was awarded the Erasmus Plus Fellowship for conducting research at the Department of Cultural Anthropology at George August University, Göttingen, from October 2019 to March 2020. Amrita, very warm welcome to you to TFO Forum. I think we met a couple of years ago. It's good to reconnect and happy to have you for today's discussion. Over to you, Amrita.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for the warm welcome, and thank you everyone for taking out time for this talk. So as Nicola already mentioned that I did my MPhil from JNU, and I think I'll pick the strand from there because that is how I got interested in this film Labor of Love, also called ASHA JAOAR MAJHE, which is the Bengali title. So I'll give a brief summary of what my MPhil project was on to locate as to how this film was in my domain of interest. So in my MPhil project, I looked on the post-millennial alternative Bengali films, and I tried to understand the cinephilic or the technological infrastructures that were crucial for this film. So I studied the film festivals, and in this quest, of course, my work borrowed from the works of Madhuja Mukherjee, Manoj Ghosh, who have worked on Sthaniya Sangbad. Madhuja has worked on the city films that she caused of the Calcutta trilogy of Mrinal Sen. And I tried to argue about how these films offer a very critical engagement with various facets of urban life. And this brings me to Labor of Love, or what interests me in this film. So what is this film about? To be honest, what intrigues me is that, in a word, this film is about nothing. It's about the banality of daily existence. And in another sense, this film is so much about the city of Kolkata. Now, how exactly is this film about the city of Kolkata, or what are the things about urban life and living that the film engages with? In this sense, I'll first begin with the announcement with which the film also begins, where you hear about how there's a job crisis, and then it boils it down to a particular class that has been affected by the economic crisis, which is the middle class. And then you think about, okay, so Labor of Love, is this film about love? Does this connote an idea of romance? Is this film about an economic crisis? Is it political? Is it romantic? What exactly is this film about? Well, I read this film as an experiential investment into what urban life is about. It's about engaging with the city on multiple levels. I'll first focus on the element of time. So we see the protagonist leave for her office, and she takes a tram, she eats a cake, then she takes a bus, and then as the bell rings, then she hurries towards her workplace. And of course, it makes us think about how our body, or how that is structured by time in urban living. And this also is important because this film is essential also about conjugality. Asha Jawar Majhe is about what is there between coming and going, and what's there is that is the time when the couple get to meet, that constitutes their moment of bliss. So what is conjugality in this specific point of time? So of course this film is about love, but the love isn't situated in a vacuum. It's anchored into this very specific spatio-temporal coordinates as to love in the time of crisis. And we see this because she has a different work shift, the husband has a different work shift, and then love here is not really about what they're doing while they're together. It's about knowing that the partner is not there, and then you leave the key at a specific place, she picks it up from that place, and this way of adjusting your sorry, I just heard the echo of my own voice. So this is essential about how they adjust their own living with the fact that they aspire to be with the partner, but that's something that the times cannot allow them to do. I'll now talk about the specific scene with which I just mentioned, about her leaving for her workplace, then she takes the tram, then she takes the bus, and the entire vehicular noise that we listen. We hear the bus sound, we hear the noise of tram, and these are such banal elements of everyday life that the human ear does not chronicle to in a very conscious manner. We are just soaked in this, we are immersed in this. Of course I'm talking about a life that's pre-COVID, right, where we are living for work every day, and that's just our way of life. That's just the quotidian, the banal, the everyday aspect of the very humdrum affairs of everyday living. And in this context, I'll talk about another film which I was very interested in. And when Nikhila came up with this offer, that was the first film that came to my mind. But I looked up YouTube because I don't have access to a number of other streaming platforms because of EU and all that. So I looked up YouTube, and the film didn't have subtitles. But this film is Shabdo, and it reminds me, and I can share the link later for those who are interested in watching the film. And this film has a sequence where the protagonist is walking, and it's this vehicular noise that kind of envelops him while he's walking. And slowly we hear the ambient sound being reduced. So we hear less of the bus sound, we hear less of the traffic noise, we hear less of the bells. And then we start hearing more about his footsteps, and they amplify in the oral register. And then we see the Taro, who is the protagonist, recreating the sound in his studio because he's a Foley artist. So what the film does was it makes us perceive sound as the protagonist does, as Tarok does, and we hear what Tarok hears. So Tarok is a Foley artist, is interested in recreating sounds, and so all these other bus, tram sounds, they kind of recede into the background, and his focus is on his footsteps, and the next shot is about how he recreates that. Now, why I talk about this specific scene is because that is also what Labor of Love does. The film doesn't have dialogues. And when I was watching it, what it did to me was that I was perceiving these very distinct tones, these very distinct cadences of sound that otherwise I'm very oblivious to, that we are just wrapped in it. And I never think of these as very discrete, as very distinct sound notes. But when I was watching Labor of Love, I kept paying my attention to all these. But what does this film just make you like all hooked and all attentive to this diverse sensory stimuli? I wouldn't say that, because there are also moments when I kind of zoned off, and I knew that I'm not missing out on anything, because that's what this film is about. It's not about that there is a narrative climax, it's a crisis that the film has to go towards, and you have to be on the hooks, or otherwise you miss a narrative detail. It's not about that. It's about the experiential dimension of an understanding that about the protagonist, and then soaking the viewer into that in a way. So coming to the noise of the bus, the noise of the traffic, and what I mentioned about ambient sound, this film, when I was watching it, it rendered the ambient sound not as something that's in the ambience, that's in the background, but something that's at the fore, something that you engage with, something that you pay your attention to. So this also makes us think then about the sound design, and that's not surprising because I just mentioned Shobdo, about the Foley artist who creates sound for film, and it's a very interesting way to think about this film also in terms of sound design. Not to mention that, of course, this film also won an award for sound design, and this brings me to the central question with which I began: what exactly is this film about? Would I read it just as a film of romance, as a film that makes us think of romance in a particular moment of time. I would also read this film as a film that is politically charged. I mean, it begins with the note of the economic crisis, the job crisis that's there, about protests happening. And then we do get an idea of the protests that are happening in the city. We don't see the protests, we don't see the fists, we don't see the faces, we just hear their voices. And how do we hear the voices? It's about when the protagonist is there, it just floats into the room. In another sequence, I remember we hear lorai, lorai, lorai chai, lorai kore baste chai. It's about struggle, it's about resistance. But we don't see the political rally. We don't see the people, the activists who are protesting. What we see is what we hear rather is the sound of this, and we get an idea that the city is rocking with all these protests. And to the best of my memory, these slogans are there when one can register that someone is traveling through a train. So you have this visuals, and then you hear the slogans. So this is definitely a film that's also a commentary on the political turmoil that the city is experiencing at that specific point of time. But what interests me again is the ambivalence of the film. Is this film about making a very powerful critique, making a very powerful commentary? Or is this also about, like I said, is this about nothingness? Is it about banality? Is it about what's mundane, what's daily? What we see is he goes to the bazaar, he cooks, he puts the clothes on the clothesline, she comes back, she folds the clothes, then she washes. These are the activities that we are engaged in every day. This is what constitutes our daily, and it's something that's so significant, and probably that makes it reside that we don't think about this. And this film makes us recognize or realize all these banal activities, these banal sounds, these banal sensations that envelop us every day. I mean, I remember I watched this film in the Calcutta Film Festival, and I watched it again a few days back for this talk, and I was struck with nostalgia. I mean, that particular scene where you see the sunset and you hear the conch shells, and I mean, that is how I experienced sunsets in Kolkata. Of course, I also had the azan, and the film doesn't chronicle the azan, but I remember my sunsets in the city where I spent 5 years as that, where I recognize these sounds. The sounds are so familiar that when I watched it here, I kind of missed that this is not the sensory perception that I have right now. What I have right now is very different from what I had back then, which brings me to acousmatic voice and talking about banal sounds. And then you hear this woman who's vocalizing, practicing, and then the teacher tells her, no, you're getting it wrong. And then she sings again, and then she sings again. And if one walks through the alleys, and I have been brought up in the small town Durgapur, so I wasn't brought up in Kolkata, but I remember that when I walked past the alleys, I would listen to these sounds. And you don't see the faces in the film who are singing, but you hear the radio, you hear the television announcement, you hear the people vocalizing, and it's just the voice without a face. And that is what, on a very personal note, that is what captured my attention when I was watching this film. And that's exactly what I loved about this film, as to how the visuals, of course, are there, but how the sound is so important to understand just a very distinct way of life that kind of strikes the sense of familiarity with those who are living in the city. And then how does one also think of noise or of sound in terms of noise, or as this being also a critique? And of course, I spoke of the factory bell, which rings. You have to start work now. You have to end your work now. I mentioned the conscious of the woman singing, but I remember this one particular scene where the male protagonist is working at the printing press, and you hear the noise. You hear the noise of the machines working, and that's vibrant. That's strong, and to a certain extent, I felt that otherwise the film was soothing. It had a calm texture, and at that point, you see the visuals also cut, and you hear the machines go, the noise, and then of course it made me think as to whether this film is also a critique of the threshold of the noise that urban living makes you like kind of throws you into, and that significantly exceeds the threshold level of tolerance. And why I also read it as a critique is because I remember how I shifted from a very small town with not with the noise, and then when I shifted to Kolkata, it took me a month for me to get my proper night's sleep, because all that noise, all that sound, it definitely it disturbed me. I was not used to that way of living. But for someone who has been living in the urban environment for a long time, would be oblivious, would be immersed, would be so it, like would not think about these as very discrete, very distinct tones, very distinct noise elements or sound elements, but would be oblivious and wrapped in it. I'll now move on to another element of sound in the film, which is the song Tumi Je Amar. And for anyone who is familiar with Bengali films of Uttam Suchitra, the star couple, Tumi Je Amar is a quintessential romantic song. I mean, I have been born in 90s. I never really went to the theater to watch an Uttam Suchitra film, and I watched the romantic films, the romantic melodrama that's been critically termed as much later. But even then, I knew this song. So this is a song that one is just familiar with. It has a specific currency, and I wouldn't say it would be wrong to argue that it's a very strategic use or a very strategic mobilization of the song for two reasons. Number one, of course, it taps into the audience knowledge of the song. It will strike a chord with anyone who is familiar with Uttam Suchitra films of romance. And the film just floats in the evening air. He just leaves for work, and you just listen to Tumi Je Amar playing. On another note, of course, it situates this film into this romantic reading. And I argue, or I would specifically stand for this argument all the more, because when the couple finally meet, everything around them turns misty. It's not their regular domestic household where they are situated, but they are in the midst of a forest, and they sit together. Then she gets up, she dresses, he watches her dress, he helps her dress, and then she leaves. And I remember another song, Choto Khoti Ne Akash To Boro of Uttam Suchitra, that was also situated in a park. So the currency of the romance of Uttam Suchitra, it was definitely anchored into the currency of their songs, the romantic songs, and definitely had a very strong romantic charge. And I find it intriguing that the film employs this specific song, because this is definitely a way to read how this film locates the idea of romance into labor of love, not via dialogues, not via the conversation of the partners, not via the time they are spending together, but by throwing this auditory cue, and you read that this song is the quintessential romance. Moving on, and still lingering on the element of sound, is what does this film does then? I mean, we listen to radio, we listen to TV, we listen to someone just practicing singing about the song Tumi Je Amar, and I would read this as an oral map of the city, as a soundscape, as the urban soundscape. And in this context, I'll talk about the film Sthanio Sangbad, which of course is something I mentioned in the beginning that Manoj Ghosh has worked on. So Manoj Ghosh argues as to how these films kind of exploit the aesthetics of the digital camera, the global aesthetics of digital camera, and he reads this as new realist techniques. And he talks about how Sthanio Sangbad is a film that borrows from the tradition. Why I am interested in Sthanio Sangbad, or Spring in the Colony, which is a film by Amrita Biswas and Gauri Saria, and if I remember correctly, it was around the same time or before this film. I have to get the date, sorry. But in Sthanio Sangbad, the protagonists, they move through different pockets of Kolkata. They move through settler colony to Park Street, then they go to New Town, and these different locations in the city, they have a different oral texture. In the colony, you hear people chatting, you hear someone singing, you hear the radio. In Park Street, you hear this vehicular noise, because of course it's one of the busiest streets there. And then again in New Town, you hear this sound of construction, which makes sense because there are so many constructions happening in the area. So of course, Sthanio Sangbad is about so many things that Manoj Ghosh definitely talks about. But then the film is definitely also about mapping the city, not just via the spaces visually, but also getting an oral map of the city. And I would definitely read Labor of Love along these lines as well. So then I have picked a number of threads, a number of strands, and to talk about it, how do I then think of this film? Do I think of it as a political, as a romantic, as a city film? And that's the ambivalence. But in an interview, Aditya Vikram Gupta stated that this film is essentially about his very ambivalent relationship, his love and hate relationship to the city. And I perfectly recognize as to why he articulates this film as something that encodes his ambivalent relationship, because of course there are elements where one understands his critique of urban living, but then of course one also sees this very romantic and wistful engagement with the city. I mean, like I said, I was struck with nostalgia when I saw this film again. I recognized the familiarity. I understood the visuals, and I understood the sound. And of course, I missed some sound elements. Like I said, I missed the azan, of course. But I realized as to what is the vantage point from which the filmmaker is trying to engage. And along this note, about speaking about wistfulness, I'll talk about the very last scene where you see the protagonist, the male protagonist, he sips his cup of tea and he watches his wife leave for work again. So this film is basically about her leaving for work and ends at the same time. So it's about 24 hours and what happens within that span of time. And you recognize that wistful look, that longing, and that is what that is what situates his aspiration, the aspiration for conjugality, for being with the partner, which gets so difficult because of the economic and the job crisis, which kind of forces you to work in this pattern that you don't get those moments of conjugal bliss that you aspire for, and therefore that look on his face on which the film ends. She just walks and he just keeps on looking outside the window. So I will end my talk on this. I mean, there might have been a few threads that I missed, but of course we can pick up on that when we begin the discussion.
Thanks, Amrita, for suggesting this very interesting film. I mean, there was so much more that we could notice in the absence of dialogues. You map the very interesting soundscape of the film. The film and Amrita's opening remarks, now I think we can take up for discussion. Anyone who wants to go in first? Yes, Nipa, please.
Thank you, Amrita, for suggesting this film, which hadn't crossed my radar, and for your very interesting remarks about the film, and your reference to other films to think about simultaneously. I've seen Sthaniyo সংবাদ, I haven't seen Shabdo, and I've put it on my list now. I think it's a great pairing, and of course, I'm immediately thinking about ways in which I could perhaps teach this film. And that brings me to a question that I think is interesting. So when you mentioned how being in Germany, this film made you feel, I certainly experienced the same thing, extreme nostalgia. And I immediately shared it with family members who are also outside India and with friends, and everybody reported exactly the same thing. And we got talking about whether this feeling, whether, you can subtitle a film, the language of a film, but how do you translate sound? And how does the feeling of the feeling that's evoked when you hear the tram, if you don't know what a tram sound is, and I can guarantee you that 100% of my students here have never heard a tram. So how will they'll get the general sense of a city, and they'll probably be very bored. But it raised for me the very interesting question about the translation of sound and the way in which people talk about the sense of smell as evoking memory. But this film made me very keenly conscious about how sounds far more powerfully than images evoke memory and a feeling of being in a place. So it's just a question about how would this film be taught outside. I think any other Indian would get it, but I'm not sure that my students sitting here in Pittsburgh, I would certainly frame everything for them, but you can't get a person to feel something unless they have. So it just raised that question for me. I don't know if you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, thank you, Nipa. That's really an interesting observation. And to be honest, I was also trying to be critical of this feeling I was having, but I have never been homesick here. And like you said, I watched this film and I get homesick. And it's not just because of the sound, but I remember I spent 5 long years listening to this sound every specific sunset. I know the sound, and this is what this film taps into, right? About this experiential domain that the film would know it connects. There would be an audience that is familiar, that connects on this note. And it was not just the sound, to be honest. I mean, that particular scene where she just pours the spice and everything into the jars, and you see these colors, you see the dal, all the spices that that we use daily, and then I have never thought of them as being such a colorful ensemble. But when the camera is just focused on that, and I just see, oh my God, this is such a fascinating splash of colors. It's such a visual treat for my eyes. But of course, this film taps into this familiar zone, the experiential zone, which of course triggered this nostalgia for me and for you as well, about how to connect this, or about how to translate this to, of course, an international students who would not recognize. I mean, I agree, there does lie a challenge, because they might not understand the feeling evoked. They might have very different structure of feeling than what we experience, because we have been imbibed in that ecosystem, in that specific ambience for so long. But I also think that when they see this, when they see the images, when they see the sounds, they will have a very different sensory perception, a very different perception of what these mean to them, of how they encode them. And I think I would take up the challenge. I would love to know what they would understand. I mean, I remember it was my birthday and I wanted to show some films to my colleagues here, and I showed Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, and they were disappointed. They were like, Amrita, you just showed us a film about Spain in a film from India. Why? And I was like, that does make sense. Now, what I did was I selected that film specifically because I thought it would be very familiar to them, and they would identify, they would register, they would understand La Tomatina, they would find these points of associating with the film. And I was thrown off board because they were disappointed with the fact that they didn't have anything that was not familiar to them. So I think one could tap into this and try to understand how they read, and their reading might be devoid of nostalgia, but they might read this as claustrophobic, because like I said, I am nostalgic right now after spending 5 years within that environment. But when I moved to Calcutta from Durgapur, and Durgapur is stripped of all these noise. I mean, it's like calm, silent, and it never occurred to me that when I would shift to Calcutta, I would be disturbed by sound or noise or vehicular traffic, or I would have to think of them that, oh my God, this is disturbing with my sleep. But this happens. So they might have a very different register of experience, which I would love to hear about. Yes.
I just want to mention one quick thing. First, I've taught Sthaniya Sangbad, and students have loved it. But the other thing about this film is it really reminds me of this idea that I read in a filmmaker, anthropologist, David McDougall, where he writes about how a filmmaker and a general audience watch the same film differently. So for the filmmaker, the film is a reduction of all of the possibilities that the film had. And for the viewer, it's opening up into this new world. But the key idea that he talks about is that the second viewing no other viewing of a film is going to be the same as the first viewing. You will never again get that first viewing because and this film really demonstrates that very powerfully, because the Shehnai music that it starts with, it's nice to listen to, but you don't really know what it means until you hear it again at the end and you understand, weddings, of course. That's the music we associate with weddings. So of course, that's the film is telling us now, and there are other things you realize. There's a certain point in the film where you begin to realize, oh, okay, I get it. It's a couple and they are, they've just, they both ate cake. Interesting. I wonder why they're both eating. So there's these moments of recognition as you're going through. It is a film that requires you to be cognitively attentive and paying attention and putting two and two together. And then you realize, so that is only a first time viewing experience. So this film really is interesting in that way to me.
I agree on that note as well, Nipa, and thanks for the reference. When I watched it in the film festival, my experience was exactly as you mentioned. I was very critically conscious of what's happening. I wanted to analyze the sound, the visual, the color, and I was on my toes then. When I watched it here again, I wasn't watching it very critically. I had this nostalgic rush. I felt this massive homesickness. I saw the food and I'm like, oh my God, I miss this food. Oh my God, I miss being at home. And it kind of struck all those very, very, very recognized, but something that's so quotidian, something that's so integral to a pattern of life that I had back then and there. And this time, actually, in moments, I kind of zoned out. And then I knew, okay, I'm not going to miss out, because eventually it's about experiencing the film. It's about experiencing this visual texture, this oral texture, these colors. And I know I'm not going to miss out on anything. So my second viewing was relaxed. I zoned out. But of course, that was also because I had this very strong and powerful nostalgic rush. So I definitely agree that the first viewing for me as well was definitely very different from my second. Yes.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to come in now? Yes,
I mean, no, so
yeah.
I have some tangential point here. So first of all, thank you. I had no idea of the film, but I enjoyed it very much. I had somewhat different reactions, huh? So I'm not so familiar with Kolkata, so it did not evoke that same nostalgia, right? And I was just thinking, on the general line of the discussion that we were just having, and I was very struck by your idea of how the film was evoking something that was banal and the everyday. I'm just wondering, is there not a whole conceptual structure that undergirds, for instance, what you see as immediately, in some ways, interpolating an audience, right? Who is the implied audience of the film? If we kind of, ask that larger philosophical question. Now, say, for instance, I've lived in Tamil Nadu now for almost over a decade. People living in Chennai would find the film in some ways quite exotic. Yeah, many have not seen a tram. Yes, of course, the general ambience of the low middle class kind of, lifestyle could in some ways be, translate to world, but specifically the contours of the oral contours of the city would be equally foreign to them. And, I'm just kind of struck by this, and I'm wondering, perhaps Nikhila and Geeta, etc., might know also. Now, there is, of course, a whole kind of, transformative pedagogic process that's underway. And certainly with the, the suturing of the national question and all of this. Now, there have been several Hindi films, popular Hindi films, where Tamil Nadu, has kind of emerged as a new kind of reference. I'm thinking of Manoj Bajpayee's Family Man. I'm thinking of Meenakshi Sundareshan, right? Similarly as the exotic. So the only kind of, my sense, and I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, is that what you see as immediately accessible is, of course, because the implied audience, in a certain way, is perhaps the Bengali kind of, cine literati middle class. But if you came from film cultures, even in Tamil Nadu or other parts of the country, you might find this equally alien. It would not evoke nostalgia. So it's a very interesting question. Yes, how does sound translate? But also the other way around, because every other film now I see as a reference to, Rajnikant, Talaivar. So what does it actually mean? It's just a kind of philosophical question. And I'm wondering, because if these films are coming out at a certain point in time, then there's a whole rethinking of the question of language, region, culture, etc. So these are just questions that came to my mind, but on the whole, I really enjoyed watching this film. And, I also read up a little bit about the Super 8 and who's cinema for. So those are really loaded questions, so I hope that you will talk a bit about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajanta. I'm sorry because I couldn't hear the audio very clearly. I don't know if my network is a bit messed up, but what I understood from your comment was that, of course, number one, you had a very different register of experience, which is something that Nipa and I also said, that it kind of taps into the domain of familiarity. And of course, audiences not familiar, or even audiences who are familiar, might have a very different reading. And that's also the ambivalence of the film that I talked about. And then you're talking about not the banality, but rather the exoticization. Did I get it right?
Yes, absolutely. The idea of the tram, for instance, yeah. So it would be associated with heritage Kolkata, right? For many, many people in Tamil Nadu, for instance. Yeah, they see the tram as equally something, like Victoria Memorial, the tram, the thing that you see when you go to Kolkata. It's not the everyday. Yeah. So I'm just suggesting that, of course, this is also implied in the discussion that you were just having, that even within the space of the nation, there are very many viewers who would not find it accessible or, immediately, the kind of immediacy, because I think those are terms that you evoked several times, that there are many visual cultures in India that would find this particular setting equally exotic.
Right. I get that. I would actually argue along the lines of Shovan Tarafdar here, and he read the cinema of 80s and 90s, and his argument was precisely that, of course, this evokes a Kolkata, and you see, like you said, the very spatial points that tourists would recognize, Victoria Memorial and all of that. And those films mobilized these spatial points, or the tram, for instance, as something more of a background that kind of lays the foundation to understand which spatial context this film is anchored in. What Tarafdar argues is that this is of a background, and the films do not engage with perceptions or with cadences of the city. I would still argue that Labor of Love, even though it might evoke different registers of perception to different audiences located geographically, in different geographical locations, but I would still argue that its engagement with the city is not to exoticize, and that's because we do not see the very recognizable spatial points of the city. We don't see, what we see are these by lanes, these alleys, and the cat that's moving there, the food that is thrown there, and these are really not the tropes by which filmmakers have exoticized Kolkata. This is not to say that Kolkata has not been exoticized. There are a number of films that have used that spatial location as a kind of exotic background. But I would still argue that Labor of Love brings in, and like I said, it's not that it's not exclusionary in a way. It does exclude things from its registers of experience. But then I would also argue that it pulls in these different strands from what constitutes experiencing the city. And I wouldn't read this as exotic, but that also might come from my own familiarity with this very long list of films that do exoticize. And when I read Sthaniyo Songbad or ASHA JAOAR MAJHE or even Shobdo, and Shobdo is not an alternative film, it has been produced by a media giant. But even then, I would read Shobdo as an alternative film along the lines of John Berra, in the sense that these are alternative in spirit. So even if I overlook the forms of production and circulation or who finances films, But even if I focus on the aesthetics, on the visual tropes, then I would read this as something that's alternative, because there is a certain mainstream way of engagement with the city. About Meenakshi Sundareswaram and Family Man. Of course, I watched both of them, and I wouldn't say I'm very adept at articulating whether what form of engagement that is, but I did understand that there were many points of reference about kind of Bollywoodizing the culture, whitewashing the culture, that I did understand, but I can't argue about that.
Okay, thanks, Amrita, and thanks, Ajanta. Anyone else who wants to come in at the moment?
Can I, Nikhila?
Yes, Geeta, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Amrita and Nipa, Ajanta, all of you for adding your inputs. I think along with Kolkata, which is so central to the film, it's also, to my mind, making a statement about matrimony itself and the nature of the marriage of this young couple. It begins, of course, with the Shehnai. It also ends with Shehnai making marriage quite central to the film. And what was interesting for me was, despite the fact, or probably because of the fact that they rarely meet, there is no crisis in the marriage, and there is no depiction of any, there is no strain of their leading these almost parallel lives. And for instance, even some, everything goes so smoothly, the way she packs the tiffin, and then the way they leave the keys there. Not a single day, they forget to leave the key there, making the other person locked out of their own home. So everything is going tickety-boo, absolutely, smoothly. And so that I thought was something, very interesting in the midst of this larger crisis. You have the economic crisis, the political crisis that is conveyed to us orally through those sloganeering and all of that. In the midst of all that, here is something, something that is going absolutely smoothly on track. And I could be wrong, but the opening scene somehow, immediately I thought of Neeta in Meghe Dhaka Tara. She's walking until those, her footwear breaks, and then she has to get it repaired. That and the end also, the last scene of the forest with the mist. Kind of reminded me of Madhumati, which is again, a film for which the story is written by Ghotak. So where that, very famous song, Suhana Safar, is shot. So again, there, I thought there was the influence of Ghotak in the beginning scene as well as the end.
Thanks, Geeta. Amrita, you want to respond, or we can move to someone else if they want, or do you have something to say, Amrita?
Yeah, of course, I would love to respond, because Geeta just opened this horizon of interesting thoughts, and I agree about Neeta, Meghe Dhaka Tara, and I understand the reference, and it's so interesting to know what the film evoked for you, because like Neepa and I said, of course, one person watching the film twice has a different feeling, but different people watching the film would, of course, have very different structures of feeling. And it's so good to know what exactly what the film evoked for you. And about this idea of wedding, about conjugality, I mean, I perfectly understand what we're trying, what you articulated, Geeta, about this kind of utopic romanticism, right? And I wouldn't say this film is oblivious of that, because there is Tumi Je Amar, there is this quintessential romantic song being played. There is the mystical woods where they enter as soon as the husband gets back from work. So of course, I mean, they don't spend a time together, but they don't spend a lot of time together. It's definitely not what is understood as the normative conjugal life. It's definitely not the conventional wedding that we or the conventional marriage that we spoke of. But that is exactly what intrigued me about this entire utopia surrounding romanticism, and about everything falling in the right place, taking the right key, packing the food, eating the food where it's kept, knowing everything. You put the fish in there, she takes out the fish from there. Everything happens right in right, like everything, like all the perfect boxes are checked. And that is why that scene of misty woods, and why I connected that to Haranashur. It's to Uttam Suchitra romance in specific is so interesting for me. So thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much for your comments.
Okay, anyone else who wants to come in now? Okay, while people gather their thoughts, Amrita, let me share the sense that I kind of had of the film. It was, I mean, it's short, so it does not, become very tedious, because you're so used to watching films with dialogues. Here, though there are dialogues, it seems as if, for instance, there is something that is exchanged between the woman and at the workplace, and somebody who is also working in the same, probably it's a packaging gig industry where she's working, and there's some conversation that is exchanged, but it seems like we don't need to know about it, so the spectators don't need to know what is happening. So there were two kinds of I mean, I was trying to situate this film between two films, that this film kind of brought to my memory. And the reason for it is this: I was trying to understand. I mean, generally, when we discuss sound, we think of it in terms of diegetic and extra diegetic sound. Now, what is this soundscape of the film? Is it diegetic? Or is it extra diegetic? If it is diegetic, it seems as if there are just a few sounds to which the characters are responding. Otherwise, much of it is like it's only meant for us. So it's almost as if, I mean, if its function is to underline the images for us, which would probably be the function of extra diegetic sound, then is that the purpose of this sound? So in this context, I was thinking of, especially when you were talking about the city and the city's soundscape structuring, if you ask the question, is it structuring the relationship between these two in any significant way? I was remembering Girish Kasarwalli's film called Mane, Ghar. It's made in Hindi as Ek Ghar. So where the sound kind of impinges, the city's sounds impinge on the relationship between this couple, so much so that whatever tenuous relationship that they're trying to establish is to, completely torn asunder. So the sound has a very strong kind of diegetic presence to which the characters are responding. So this is on one side. The other side, I was thinking of Abbas Kiarostami's film Shirin, where apparently, we watch the expressions of on the faces of the audience who are watching this tragic romance that is unfolding on the screen, and we don't actually see the romance. We only hear this Shirin and Khusro tragic romance being played out, and this whole sort of mythology that has developed around the film, that Kiarostami shot these actors in the theater independently and then added the sound later on. So when we think of this film too as a film like that, I mean, so I was asking, so is it more akin to a Kiarostami film like, Shirin, where the soundscape does not really matter, it does not really structure their relationship. So they are just going on oblivious to the sound, and this is just something that gets added on for effect later on. So this was my own sense. And as Ajanta was saying, I didn't feel these sounds kind of soaking me in into a sense of Kolkata or anything like that. But it made me aware of the sound of visuals. For instance, of the foam, the soapy foam. Of course, there is a sound to it, but if it isn't for this film, I don't think we would have really noticed the sound, right? So there were many images. I mean, what we know as images, which get our attention as sounds in this film. So that was what was interesting for me. But surely this is a sound design. I mean, if Nipa was thinking of introducing this film in class, I would be, very interested to know, how would one even think of a conceptual structure, within which to fit this film. Thanks, Amrita. This is all that I had to say about the film.
I have a quick response. I mentioned the film Shabdo, and the reason why I first thought of talking about that film, which doesn't have the subtitle version on YouTube, is because there, like you said, here the sound doesn't impinge into their lives. It doesn't tap into the crisis. In Shabdo, the film taps into the crisis. And I'll give a brief summary to give an idea of how that film also plays with sound. And it's very interesting to think of this film in a relational way to that film as well, because here, like you said, I have lived there. I have a different register of experience, but for a viewer or for the audience who is not very familiar, for them, like I said, that the sounds which the human ear fails to chronicle, that okay, this is happening, that we are oblivious to, it kind of draws your attention to that, like you said about the Foti soap. And I was also thinking of the bazaar sounds. I mean, you then hear people negotiate, you then hear while she chops the fish, so you then listen to the sounds attentively, which otherwise are just floating around us. Now what Shobdo does is that it shows how sound can impinge into this conjugality between the partners, because the Foley artist, he is so attentive to his work that he can't respond to human voices, because he is just focused on ambient sound, and his work is about creating these sounds for the films. So there comes a point of time when, even if it's in a conversation, and I remember this one particular scene which is so interesting, because and I'll try to describe, so to get a sense of what I'm trying to tell here, is that the protagonist is sitting at a tea shop, and he's talking to someone, and then he talks, and then he talks, and then he just slips into this zone where he's not cognitively recognizing what the person is saying. That just blurs, and the viewers the audience gets a sense of that, because you see that voice, it slows down, and what you hear is that the tea is being poured into a mud cup, a jar is being placed on the stove. So then you understand that, okay, this person is not listening to the human voices. This person is differing from the societal conventional norms of auditory investment. He's listening to how tea is how the person pours tea into the cup, how the jar, and these sounds which you don't think about. He thinks about those sounds, and that affects their conjugal relationship, because he just zones out while even talking to his partner. And that creates a crisis. And I think later he goes to a rehabilitation center in Mondarmoni, where they try to divest him of ambient sound, and they try to make him connect to human voices, so that he tries to focus on human voice again. So when I think of what you said about whether it's more like the Kiarostami film, or whether it's more like the other film that you spoke of, where it makes I would say it's more in terms of Kiarostami film, as in the sounds don't impinge into their lives, but the sounds anchor the audience. You hear Ami Je Tomar, you know what it is about. You hear the political slogans,
you know about the economic crisis. You don't say, like I said, you don't see the fist, you don't see the political activists' faces, but you get an idea. You get an idea of the protest that is rocking the city, of the crisis that's there in the city. You get an idea of the spatial-temporal coordinates within which this conjugality is located, and that is for the audience to tap into, to critically recognize. That was also my experience with the first viewing of the film. And it also helps one to read the film, as in, I of course read it as a utopic romanticism because of Tumi Je Amar soundtrack being there into the film. I don't know how I would have read the film had the soundtrack not being there.
Okay, anyone else who wants to come in now? Sanjay, Tarakeshwar. Yeah, Tarakeshwar, please go ahead.
If no one else is there. Okay. Let me at the outset say that I'm not a Bengali. So, nor I am from Calcutta. So then the question of nostalgia is ruled out. And I can't frame this particular narrative in the context of other narratives too. So in that sense, so I will not be doing what Amrita tried to do by placing it in the, looking at it in terms of other films in Bengali. So the only film that I could take as a kind of resource to make sense of this film was Pushpaka Vimanam, a film which came, I think, late 1980s in almost all languages, South Indian languages plus Hindi. It had different names in different languages, but the award was given to that film as the best film in Kannada. There was a controversy, of course. How can you call this as a best film in Kannada when there are no dialogues? Of course, it was shot predominantly in Bangalore. The locale was Bangalore, but it did well commercially also in all other languages when it was released in those languages. So in that sense, the question that I'm trying to raise was on what basis we call a film a Bengali film or a Kannada film. In that sense, so should we see this as a Bengali film because the locale in which the narrative that is shown to us is Calcutta, or is it because there are few Bengali nice sound, language that comes here and there as a background sound? Should we call it as a Bengali film? Or does the narrative say something about it? Or should we see it as it is incidental that it is located in Calcutta, but it's basically talking about absence of communication, not between people, but between husband and wife, not because of anything else, but because of the way the capital has structured our lives, the way it has alienated us. For me, it looked like a completely a Marxist film, looking at even the labor of love. I thought it's an ironical thing. Both love their labor and they forget to love each other. Is something that comes across to me, where the capital, how it turns human beings into aliens. It alienates them from their own location, from their family, from everything else. So in that sense, the monotony, the what happens there is being mechanical. What they were do is that they are alienated. Only thing that they are supposed to do is that, yes, there is a background, there is a political rally that is happening, but these people are not perturbed by it because they have no time and there is no inclination. There's nothing else which can come into their routine. There absolutely absence of the social, absolutely the absence of the political, not in the narrative, but in their life. It is there in the background, but it is absent in their life. This recession might affect my job. There's nothing of that sort. So how this capital is turning us into asocial, apolitical, is something I thought the narrative is trying to communicate to me. So in that sense, even the question of the conjugality, I thought it's more there in its absence, or impossibility of being a couple. So it looks like a shift that they're taking up to work for the capital and work for the family. So you do this shift and I will do that shift in the family. So it looks like a kind of shift that they're sharing rather than being a couple. So in that sense, so it's more about the impossibility of being couple or absence of conjugality, and how even family is affected by this capital. That's what I thought. This film is more about that rather than about anything about that locale itself. Locale is, I think, was immaterial to me. It sounded like a Marxist classical theory on how the modernization is alienating human beings. So locale is, I thought, very incidental, and the language is also incidental. It is made precisely dialogueless because it could appeal to anyone. It could convey to anyone. And if it is depending on the soundscape, then it is not talking about these universal issues or theme. It is something else which is specific to Calcutta as such. But being a non-Bengali and not able to place it in the context of other films in Bengali, I thought it is precisely works like Pushpaka Vimanam. It could be a film in Hindi, it could be a film in Malayalam, it could be a film in Tamil, but it gets an award just because it was located in Bangalore as a best Kannada film. So my comparison to understand this film is about Pushpaka Vimanam, not other films. And then the second point it raises about if Mookie film was more universal and could transcend language barriers, why did we go for language, the talkie films at all? So, and then why these experiments which are coming up where it is not completely silent movies as such, but there is an absence of dialogues. Yes, as you said, soundscape is there. Can you see that in that context of this movement from silent to talkie, and then these kind of experiments? What do these experiments say about the film itself? Whether the language is an essential component of the cinema, or is it not? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tarkeshwar. Amrita, you want to respond to? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll respond because otherwise I'll forget, because there are so many threads that I have to respond to, that I'm trying to place them first. About the idea of alienation or isolation. I would rather read it as a kind of solitude. I don't remember if I mentioned it during this talk, but this very meditative pace of the film. This, like I also said, that thinking about the pace, that particular scene where the machines at the factory, they make that deafening noise, that it struck me that this is something different from what the film has been so far. So I was thinking more along the lines of how the entire economic scenario has, or how rather the meditative pace of the film kind of spills over into this idea of this isolation. And therefore I would connect this to the very last scene where he also wistfully, longingly looks at the partner when she leaves for work. So I would definitely agree on that note about the absence of conjugality. I wouldn't call it an absence of conjugality. I would rather read it that it dislodges the very normative ideas of conjugality. What do we define conjugality to be? I mean, if we take that into question, then we think of conjugality also in very normative terms. And then to think that this film is an absence of conjugality would be kind of establishing that the normative way of conjugality where partners stay together is the normative way. So I would rather argue that this film dislodges the normative idea of conjugality and then gives us a utopic romantic alternative of conjugality, where, as Geeta also pointed out, that there is a crisis, but it doesn't hamper their life. They are going on. He puts the key, she picks the key, and everything is like on point. So I would rather think of it as another, as not this unidimensional view of what conjugality should be, but rather as something that opens the thread of how conjugality can also be thought of as in these times. And therefore, this brings me to the idea of nomenclature as to whether I would, or how I would call it a Bengali film. I would actually call it about a film that's set in Kolkata rather than a Kolkata film like that. And what I have emphasized is about these aspects of urban living, and the fact that it talks about an urban way of life is key to the fact that so many of you are also responding. There's a chat. Sorry, I went just
I don't know. You can continue. You can continue.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
I just got distracted. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay. What was I talking about? Right. About how to think of it as Bengali film. I would suggest let's not think of it as a Bengali film. Let's think of this film as a film that talks about urbanity, and that's also something that I said, that when I moved to Calcutta, I understood this experiences. I wouldn't have understood them otherwise. So about whether because the few songs and whether these few dialogues are in Bengali, whether, I mean, I have a very ambivalent relation myself to this idea of nomenclature, and that is something that also draws into this entire academic discourse around what is regional and what is national cinema, if India at all has a national cinema. So this, of course, is a very wide thread that the question by, sorry, whose question was it? Das Gupta, was it? Okay, sorry. So Tarakeshwar, yeah, sorry. So that is the question that Tarakeshwar's question spills over into, as to how do we think of it as regional. I mean, to be honest, I have issues with the idea of what exactly constitutes regional, because this film has been acclaimed in international festivals, so which means that international audiences have also responded to it, maybe on different registers than the way I have personally responded to it. But that's what I said, that there are different registers on which this film can be understood, read, and everything. Did I miss a thread? Why I do compare it with other Bengali films, that is interesting, because, like I said, I would read it as a film that's based in Kolkata, and I read it on this line for two main reasons. Because number one, and I because this film intrigued me or interested me a lot. I was at this point of time where I was listening to interviews of Sen Gupta, and this is not to say that what Sen Gupta's vision has to be the monolithic vision, and no one can differ from that. But Sen Gupta, when talking about this film, definitely said that this is a film, but the city is the protagonist. It's therefore roots my ambivalent love-hate relationship to the city. I echoed that, or I understood that also, because is this universal or is this regional? I would say that putting it into these binary boxes in itself would be very problematic, because if this is just about a region, then why are we even discussing a film on a platform? like this, where there are people from so many regions, or why is even Nipa considering showing this to her students who are not based in Kolkata? Then does this film is entirely universal, and does it just erase all these local textures that can be read and understood by an audience that is familiar with that particular ecosystem? I would also not argue in favor of that. The local textures are present, and they are present very vibrantly. That walk through the meandering alley, that very specific Bapuji cake that she chews on in the tram, that the meandering cat, the way he puts his cycle down from the building, the way he cycles through the alleys, these lanes, alleys, decrepit downtowns, a middle class household. These definitely have a certain local anchoring, but that's not to say that this boxes the film into a regional local film. So what I would argue is that I wouldn't read this binary tropes, because that would be very problematic and that would make it very difficult to respond to a film like this. I would think of it as a film that's set in a very specific urban location, in a very specific geo-temporal context as well. It's not set in 1980s. It's set in this phase of economic crisis, when there was a job crisis, when there are protests, when lorai 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 chai, lorai kore baste chai is a definite slogan. And then, of course, it's also about navigating through that very specific geo-temporal context, while at the same time evoking these emotions, evoking these affective responses that, as Tarakeshwar pointed out, are so universal. So I don't know if I could articulate what my vantage point is, but yes, I think I have covered most of the threads.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to respond now? Sanjay? Jayanto? Sanjay? Okay, Jayanto, please go ahead.
Okay, I really do not have, much to say, except that this is to some extent a response to Tarakeshwar's question also, that to what extent is this a Bangla film, So what is it about the film which can help you to locate it in Kolkata? You see, there is, although, I mean, Amrita herself, purpose of the director also to sort of enclose their lives in the very, very obvious sort of a banality, which take place every day. But underlying this banality, I think there is a very, very strong sense of sentimentality, which was also there in the films of Ghatak, and for which he has been criticized, that in spite of the very, very cerebral nature of his films, there was this very, very Bengali sentimentality that he could not overcome, And I liked the relationship between Neeta of Meghe Tara to this girl, I don't remember her name, the protagonist, the female protagonist of this film, is one, there's a difference. There's a great deal of similarity. The major difference is that she doesn't have to walk through the streets of Kolkata with a torn chappal, which becomes the kind of, let us say the symbol of Neeta's existence. I think the problem with films like Meghe Tara, in spite of their brilliance, was that the point of view of Neeta's father, I mean, who sort of focuses on the tragedy of middle-class existence in post-partition Bengal, the poverty, the loss of prestige, the loss of property or whatever, I mean, he tends to universalize it, Ghatak. And that is what is Bengali about it, I think if I were to sort of answer or address Tarakesh's question, it is very, very deliberately given a pace which is very slow, Even the choice of the mode of transport is a very conscious choice. The very fact that she chooses the tram other than the bus is that there is this something very slow and gentle about the tram, as compared to the bus, which is much more frenetic, which is much more in keeping with the frenetic pace of the city of Calcutta. I mean, if those of us who have been in Calcutta for even substantial periods of time, we know that tram conductors are basically gentler people as compared to bus conductors. I have noticed this. This is true. There is a very slow pace about their lives, and although this is the pace of the film, he is talking about an underlying tragedy. And it is not a tragedy at the same time because they eat well. I don't know, because if you're a Bengali, you know how precious is that concept of the paka rui, and that too, if it is alive at the time of your purchasing it, so you are not poor. So that cannot be romanticized. What can be romanticized is the fact that you don't get to meet. It is also your choice. And also the fact that it is romanticized depends, as in Meghe Dhaka Tara to some extent, as in this film, that Nita's anguish at the failure of her dreams can be expressed only in the hills of Darjeeling, and here the two of them can celebrate their togetherness, the fact that they are lovers, all said and done, only in that idyllic circumstance in the midst and in those mahua trees which grow on the seaside and all that, as if there is nothing lyrical, nothing romantic possible in the city of Calcutta, which I find problematic, which even in the midst of a whole lot of chaos, there is possibility for love, there is possibility for, so, I mean, I don't know why, because even although it may be because it's the first of the month, and one of the two has got their salary, they are eating well, and all the, the abundance, images of abundance, which what is called Bajar Kora in Bangla, he comes back with a whole lot of stuff, and the very act of emptying them into jars shows a kind of contentment which cannot be equated with pathos, So I think that it operates at two levels which are not mutually compatible. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jayanto. Yeah, Amrita, you want to respond?
Yes. I mean, very, very interesting observation. I mean, I am intrigued by the references to Meghe Dhaka Tara coming, because when I watched it, I actually watched it in a very relational way to Shabdo and not Meghe Dhaka Tara, because and it's interesting because I've worked on Ghatok, and then I don't think of Meghe Dhaka Tara mostly, but I think of Shabdo and Sthaniyo Songbad and all these very contemporary films rather. But yes, of course, that outburst of Nita, the traumatic outburst in the hills, and what you say that the hills could accommodate that, I perfectly agree that there has to be a rationale that specific outburst was shot there and amidst the hills, and of course there is this also element of the peaceful, the hills, and then Nita's tragic outburst. So of course that's a very interesting thread to think about the contentment, and about whether there's a tragedy. I wouldn't read this film as a statement of tragedy. I would it never occurred to me to think of pathos. I mostly read it in terms of struggle. I read it in terms of struggling for, aspiring for, aspiration. Aspiration, yes, is the word, that your aspiration for the normative conjugality, when you definitely have to work in shifts. And there is a very interesting article by Sandeep Pense on it, who talks about what or how urban time structures life, and there he argues about how it often affects the mental health, kicking in depression, anxiety, and often how that people have to mandatorily work in 2 or even 3 work shifts in an urban space to keep the family afloat, and how that could affect conjugality. Here, of course, they're not working in multiple work shifts. They just have contesting work shifts. And that is what affecting conjugality. But like you said, in that moment, and that moment is the capsule of the film, because ASHA JAOAR MAJHE and Meek also pointed out that that is labor of love is not an exact translation. Labor of love reads to many other readings as well. And as Darkesh pointed out, the Marxist side as well, of course, I wouldn't deny that, of course. But yes, I agree that it's not a tragedy. I rather read that scene as conjugal bliss. You move to misty woods. You imagine that, right? It's not happening, of course, and the romance is definitely not set in that very common middle class household. You just shift spatially into a different space, and it's misty, and it's the woods, and it's the quintessential things that we associate with romance, and it's trying to convey this utopic idea of romance. So I perfectly agree with what Dasgupta says, that it's very difficult, and that is exactly what I love about this film, the ambivalence. How do you box it, and where do you box it? There are so many readings, there are contesting readings, there are multiple readings, and would one think of it as being very content with the life? I wouldn't say so, because one scene, one shot, that longing, wistful look, and one reads it as a sense of aspiration, as a sense of wanting to have something. So there's of course not that idea of being at perfect, being fully contented. There's also not this idea of tragedy, because they have come to terms with it, and they have realized that those few moments, the capsule that I talk about is the capsule of the film. What remains between ASHA JAOAR MAJHE is what is conjugal bliss for the partners. So yeah, these are my thoughts or response to what Dasgupta said. But I'm very intrigued by the references to Meghe Dhaka Tara. I have to say, of course, Nita walking through the alleys, and of course the traumatic outburst. But yes, I wouldn't associate this film to trauma. I really associate that one particular scene to bliss, as I said. And of course, there is a longing for more of that bliss, but it is not to say that there is a disavowal that their life is, or I wouldn't say that there is this acceptance that their life is tragic. I perfectly agree with Dasgupta's reading. Yes.
Okay.
Can I just add a little thing to that?
Yes, Nipa, please go ahead.
I think if we look at at the film in terms of its cinematic language, then you have this sort of almost documentary quality to the vast majority of the film, which then renders the surreal portion of the film as a complete surprise when it happens. Like the shift to an obviously fantastical space, which I think forecloses any possibility of reading the relationship as traumatic or tragic or I don't know, as a critique. It's basically, to me, it was like the film makes that deliberate choice. It could have just shown them come home and be, happy with each other, and we could have had that space of ambiguity. I actually think it forecloses ambiguity as far as that majhe, the in-between. The title is Asha Jaoar Majhe. The in-between of coming and going, in that space is fantasy, stylistically speaking. Even in terms of sound, it changes in that moment. So the film struck me very much because it kind of lacks the sort of cynicism we see in so much cinema today. It is a remarkably uncynical film.
Yeah, I agree that it's not being satirical about that way of life, but at the same time it's not erasing that there are things happening beyond the lives of the couple. But well, the couple just move on, and the viewers just also keep moving on with the couple without resting on those other moments. But I agree with Nipa that I read that scene as bliss, as fantasy, as a conjugal utopia, the romanticism, and that is why that scene struck me more, because right after that scene we see her depart, and we see the look, and I've been talking about that look so much, and that's only because I loved that ending shot where he takes a sip and he can't do anything about it, right? What would he do? So he just has to accept, and there is this sense of acceptance, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's also one of the things that really struck me about the film, the ending. I mean, the screen just lights up. There's such a luminous, presence to that particular way in which the conjugality appears to be constructed in that moment. Sanjay is eager. Sorry, Sanjay.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I was thinking about how silence has been constructed in this film, in terms of obviously not sound or noise, but in terms of lack of conversation, lack of dialogue. So, for example, it's a deliberate choice by the director to suppress at certain places the dialogue where it would have been possible. So, for example, the telephone, when the mobile rings, at that time, then we think probably it's a like alarm or it's a call from someone. And in one of the scenes towards in the later half, the second half, we see that the husband is on telephone. So then I understand that the husband is calling his wife to wake her up. So it's like a wake-up call. She's, and because when she's not responding in the first place, then he tries again. So we see that in the first ring that she doesn't pick up. She's still sleeping. Then again he tries. But after that, there is no conversation. So he's not saying, okay, well, now get up. This is time to go to the office and all that. So deliberately that conversation is suppressed. And then since they have mobile, they could have communicated with each other or with other people they know in their life. Then again, when the wife is eating at her workplace, she is sitting alone. She is not talking to anyone. There are other people who are sitting together. She's sitting alone there. So there is no possibility for conversation there. Again, when the husband goes to buy fish, when he's interacting with there, also he must have said something how much he requires, but there is no dialogue about that again. So and when he's coming with the cycle, when he's climbing stairs, he's carrying his cycle along, then we don't find anyone on his way with whom he could have communicated or would have greeted. So first time we see him coming from the office in the morning, so we can assume that, okay, in the morning there is nobody, but then he goes to the market. He deposits that check also, on which is written something like Upadhyay. So I read it either Mukhopadhyay, Chattopadhyay or Bandhopadhyay, whatever. That is written on the check, and it is 8,000 something, 100 or something. That amount is also there. So if we assume that that is his salary, probably, but the date written is something like 15th or 16th of the month. So it might be the amount of his salary. Anyway, they are not very well off. That is very obvious from the scene. So on the whole, I think, though everything looks hunky-dory on the surface, there is something disturbing at a deeper level. So for me, it's that because they are too much preoccupied with, they are thinking about when they would meet. So that means that they are alienated. Like this is like food for thought, which I got from Tarakeshwar. So I'm thinking in those lines that they are so much, preoccupied with their own life that they have hardly, like, they are not paying much attention to their slogans also. They are going on the road. People are delivering speeches also. So for them, it is their conjugal life, which is at the focus, at the center, and they don't have time to think about anything else. Even at the workplace, this husband, he would have communicated with his colleagues when he's eating or when he's wearing, he's changing his dress also. But there is no possibility for communication. So it is obviously how this silence has been constructed. And on the whole, if I look at all these scenes, then I can think only that they are alienated from the outside world. So they are thinking about their own relationship. And finally, when they meet, well, maybe it's a strategy of the director to make a happy ending, because you see that moment when they meet is deliberately put in the narrative at the end of the film. Because the beginning of the film shows that she is going out in the lane. She is going to the office, to her workplace. Okay. And then we come back. So it's like almost 24 hours. By the end of the film, the husband is looking outward and then the wife is going in the lane. So the narrative reserves that moment to show at the end of the film. Showing it in the beginning would have been something different. So all these strategies are used to construct a narrative where deliberately the conversation is suppressed. That makes me think that it is showing alienation, though at a surface level it seems that they are, they have a romantic relationship and they are, but I think this is something disturbing for me. Yeah. Thank you. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Amrita.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sanjay. That's interesting. Food for thought. This film is definitely about urban solitude. There is no two way about thinking of it. And I would add to what you said, that it's just, of course, it is the silence. Of course, it is. And okay, it's a bit of a digression, but come to think of it, all of us notice that the film doesn't have dialogues. It kind of topples over our own expectation as a viewer, that we do expect dialogues, that when there are no dialogues, we think of it and we think of ways as to why did this film navigate through this specific oral strategy of not involving dialogues. So taking a digression, but of course I find it very interesting that how this film kind of topples onto and makes you cognizant of what your own expectations are as a viewer. You expect dialogues, and when there are no dialogues, you think of the oral register of the film. Moving back to the talk of urban solitude, of course, yes, this suppression of communication, we don't find, and like you said, that there are moments where there could have been communication, but those moments or the possibilities are stripped in the film, that communication doesn't happen. There's silence. And I would add to that in the sense that it's not just by the sound design, not just by including silence or by incorporating silence, but it's also definitely by this very meditative and very slow pace of the film. And that is why I began this talk about what is happening in the film. If we had to, like, I can talk about, okay, what happens in Meghe Dhaka Tara. It's difficult for me to talk about what happens in A Labor of Love in like 5 or 6 words. What happens? She leaves for work, he comes back, he does something, he goes to the bazaar, he puts the things in the right places, she comes back, she cooks, she washes utensils, she washes the clothes again. So what is happening? So and all of it is happening in a very meditative, you know that this pace is reflective, and it's reflective because it makes you pay your attention to this ambient sound, like Nikhila pointed, like Nipa also spoke of, that you critically engage with the sounds, but then in conjunction with the sound, I was also thinking about the pace of the film, and I thought of it not initially, but when that scene in the printing press happened, then I thought of it that so long this film has been so meditative, and I would argue that not just the silence but also this pace, they definitely contribute to an understanding that as you said, Sanjay, disturbed you. It did not disturb me. It made me think about the idea of conjugality that this film was trying to construct, but it definitely resounded this idea of a solitude that you also mentioned.
Okay, thanks Sanjay, and thanks Amrita. Sridhar was messaging me on WhatsApp. I asked him to please log back into Zoom. Sridhar, please.
Thing actually, but see, very Amrita's analysis, na, I feel that it is an impressionistic account, just as any of the audience. But if you look into the genre itself, the very genre of ambient sound is to replicate or inform the spatial specific through sound. They inform you a particular space. Now Bengal, the Kolkata, or a small town in Kolkata, a small place in Kolkata, is the center of this genre, ambience sound. You will get that image. See, we have the couple of Telugu movies released sometime back in to this film. I have sent something in the comments, the chat box. I found this in one book, the one recent book on Beyond Bollywood. So from that, I copied a sentence and shared with you to say that this film actually, Sen Gupta's film, is based on an Italian story, short story. There is also a short film made based on the Italian short story. So what I want to say is that in Telugu also there is another film, as Tara was telling, Pushpaka Vimanam. It is also there in Telugu, and also there is another movie called Mass Masala movie. Itlu Shravani Subramanyam, means by Shravani Subramanyam. In that also, the situation is same. They were facing a dire unemployment situation. So they are also working for an underpaid work, or what is it called? In economics terms, they call something. Your qualification is more, but you will be doing a job which is lesser than that. You deserve more. Underemployed. So in that film, both actors were underemployed, and they will be sharing a room without knowing each other. So after that, they realizes that someone else is staying in that room, and they develops a relationship without seeing each other. And it's in Telugu. We'll get to know only on the marriage dais. But I felt imagining that film back. See, here also the context is openly stated at the beginning and in between the film also, that 2008 recession is the context. 2008 recession, but that I don't know how recession affected Indian cities. I doubt it, but I think this is with the adaptation from other spaces. But we have similar type of movies before this film, almost reflecting the same theme. So there it is, here it is couple. They're forced to work to meet their routine life. But here, and another thing whatever I can that the fantasy and utopia of the lead actors. But I feel, I think somewhere along the way, Amrita also telling that actually they accept the condition, whatever vulnerable economic situation is there. Both the members, family members, both the lead actors accept it. When they call each other also, they don't attend the call. Both of them, they just discuss. But when he to see her, she invites him. They both of them invite that space. They don't want indirect through phone. But when they meet directly, they invite it. So I don't think it's some fantasy, or I don't know how do you understand fantasy or ambiguity. But here they accept maybe for the vulnerable situation, whatever economic situation created. But I do not know the linkages between the sloganeering and the kind of life these people are leading. I think I had made, okay, but I'll stop here.
Thank you, Sridhar. Amrita, any response?
No, firstly, I did not understand Sridhar's argument, and that might be because I had a terrible listening experience to what he said, because there were places where his voice just muffled, and I had my ears here, but even then I couldn't. I understood the argument on which he began, that I am mostly thinking along the lines of what impression the film has, much like the general audience, but I don't think why that should be problematic, because I don't think that why film enthusiasts have to necessarily have to have an impression which is different from the general audience, because I would also read that as a sense of cultural elitism, and to think that reading by the audience is not valid. So I definitely have a rationale for thinking of this film along the lines of the sensory perceptions, and not necessarily how or what are the narrative impulses are, if we can pinpoint this film to a specific narrative impulse. So I am definitely interested in the sensory perceptions that the film evokes, in the sensory stimuli of the urbanscape that this film evokes, and that is one thread that I understood. I mean, the rest of what Sridhar said kind of floated in and floated out, and it would be great, Nicola, if you could condense, because I honestly didn't get his argument, so I can't respond.
See, am I audible now?
Right now, yes.
Yeah, okay. See, what I was trying to say is that, see, taking the art.
I lost you again.
So one major thing I felt was that I do not see. One is in the discussion. There is something. Tara and others also said that fantasy and about fantasy. There is no fantasy in this actually. They accept each other. That condition, financial vulnerability, they accept it, and they don't even attend the phone calls, each other's phone call. But when they had to meet in the end, they invite that meeting. So all that proves that you are also telling.
I lost you again.
I could, while you were informing like that on that lines, I think. And another is that the sloganeering around throughout that movie, in the beginning and in the middle, and the story, very plot of the story, I did not see any connections. Maybe I do not know why they have kept it like that. And as I
lost him again.
It's based on an Italian story. Someone is writing in my book, Buddha Dev Gupta, something, Bhattacharya something.
Yeah.
So you can check it. If you are developing it, it may be helpful to you. The Indian cinema beyond Bollywood. Something, it's an edited book. So my hunch is this: if our discussion is about they're feeling the financial vulnerability and forced to live like that, but that is accepted. They're not feeling it as an forced one. They're accepted when they met it in the end. They invite. I could see like that only. And that's it. It's a comment, not a question.
Okay. I heard you better now, so I hope I got your comments right. One is the element of fantasy, or why do I locate fantasy? I mean, I would argue along the lines of what Nipa said, mostly in the sense of the misogyny, that one of course registers a shift in misogyny in that specific sequence, and definitely by the induction of the soundtrack of Tumi Je Amar. Tumi Je Amar has a very specific quintessential currency, and I wouldn't say that it is accidental that the film included that sound. The film could have included any other, it could have just included music at that specific point of time, but it included that soundtrack. And that is essentially the romantic melodrama genre, that is the quintessential romance that was there in the 1950s of Bengali cinema, which is also called the golden era, because the Uttam Suchitra films were box office hits, and they were around this Bhadralok idea of romance. So I read that particular scene as fantasy, specifically because of definitely the misogyny, and definitely because of the soundtrack that has been used a bit before that. About yes, acceptance. Yes, of course, I definitely say that there is an acceptance, because when the film ends, and that's also what Nikhila said, that ending sequence, it kind of it definitely did engage me. Why I say acceptance is because you don't see the protagonist doing anything about it, right? He sips his cup of tea and he just looks her leave. So that is why I say that, of course, this is an acceptance. But then again, your question, and that's a very interesting question, as to if there is an acceptance, then why do we talk of a fantasy? The acceptance is definitely of the urban work schedule that they have to definitely fit into, because it's not that you just leave the late night work shift, the printing press job, and you just get another job like that. If there is a job crisis, and the announcement at the beginning said that people are protesting, they also mentioned that something happened in Durgapur, that there are protests, that people are resisting the financial crisis. They're asking the government to do something about it. So he doesn't have an alternative. He has to stick to that job, right? So the acceptance is there. The fantasy is about a conjugal fantasy. Given the option of having the normative conjugality, where the partners have more time together, would he opt for that, or would he not opt for that? He would opt for that. And that is the fantasy, that is the longing, that is the aspiration, that I said that this film definitely is about aspiring towards that conjugality, and at the same time offering us a different idea of conjugality that also works together, as Geeta pointed out, that it's working perfectly well. So where is the crisis in their life? The disturbance, as Sanjay said, haunted him, is in not having that what they aspire for, that idea of normative conjugality. So I would still say that there is this interplay of acceptance on one hand, definitely, because they don't do anything about it, they maybe cannot do anything about it, and fantasy on another level, because the film definitely, like Nikhila pointed, if I remember correctly, that scene where they meet could have been in their dining room, in their drawing hall, in their bedroom. Why does the bedroom and why does the bed and the dressing table, everything have to shift in the midst of woods? Why does the song Tumi Jamar have to be played? And it is because of this that I read fantasy. So that is my response, if I got him right.
Okay, Tarakeshwar has unmuted. Yes, go ahead, Tarakeshwar.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhila. I think another important aspect of this film, apart from soundscape, is the camera work. Yes, it has been already noted that the camera lingers on certain things, ruminating on it, more or less a documentary style. The camera is stationary and the characters are doing something, or it's sometimes off focus when they're filling the those lentils and other things. It focuses on that. That is a quite interesting thing. But there are a few moments where camera also moves. One instance I can remember is it is focusing the sky and then slowly comes down to the alley, and when it finally comes down, then the cycle he enters with the cycle there. So the camera and the movement, that person entering the alley, they meet together. So that's quite interesting, I thought. So very few, it is monotonous documentary style, ruminating on certain things, lingering on it, but sometimes the camera also moves. It's a quite interesting work, but how we can, what it brings to the narrative is something that I think we need to look at. Following this, even this so-called fantasy scene at the fag end is also quite interesting. Yes, it's fantasy. No one is contesting it. Obviously, and it is melodramatic too. Earlier also, we in melodramatic films, we do have the songs picturized. If it is South Indian films in Ooty or some hill resort, later on we shifted. Earlier, before shifting to the hill stations, it used to be the sky scene in mythological films, where there's Kailasa Parvata, then the cloud scene. There they used to dance, and then then it came down to parks, hill stations, and then we started having exotic locations in Europe and America for the romance song sings. So in that sense, it is a suddenly the narrative takes it from the melodrama film and then places it here. In that sense, what is it saying it? Is it, as Dasgupta argued earlier, is there a slippage there? Suddenly from the documentary, realistic style, it is slipping into melodrama style? Or is it coming as a kind of ironically there? Is something that we need to look at. No one is contesting that it is a fantasy, but why? What function it is serving in the narrative? Is it a slippage? Accidentally, it has moved into some other style, like sentimental, you were saying, or is it ironical? Is something that then, if it is ironical, what does it say about the entire narrative? Is something that we need to look at, I thought. So I think this camera thing is very important. And the anchoring, yes, it is anchored in Kolkata, and the soundscape also amply makes it clear. The thing is whether the question that Nikhila asked, whether it's intrinsic or incidental, is a question that we need to look at. Why I'm saying it is, Dasgupta struggled to name the protagonist, the female protagonist, because there's no name. Even in the title at the end, too, it says only the female protagonist and male, if I remember right. And then it's the other characters, it simply says women workers or women laborers or something like that, and then male laborers. Nobody has any name. It is this anonymity, this alienation. We don't know. They become symbols of bodies working for the capital in that sense. So that's what I wanted to bring it in. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Amrita, please go ahead.
Yeah, very, very interesting observations about yes, the last one. Yeah, bodies working for the capital. I was thinking along these lines in the sense of that one specific scene where the factory bell rings and she looks at her watch and she hurries towards it. And I was thinking of how your sense of work time structures your body. So I was thinking of body along that lines, but I think of course it's a valid reading to think of the anonymized bodies and having a Marxist interpretation of the same. About yeah, what Nikhila said. I mean, yeah, I mean, I have the same response that I had to Nikhila, that this film is not like Shabdod. So what I responded was, it's more in the sense of delineating this experiential domain, and this, it just lingers. The sounds are just there. Are they doing anything specific? Are they doing anything specific to the characters? No, but it just taps into the experiential domain, and it and that's what they are doing. But again, because there are no dialogues, and that is also a strategy as to how the filmmaker kind of channelizes our attention, and that is the word I would use, that it channelizes our attention to listen to the sounds, which otherwise, do we consciously listen to the sounds? We listen to music, we listen to dialogues. Do we consciously listen to how the cat chews onto the bone? But in this film, because there is so much of silence, even that specific sequence of the cat chewing onto the fish bone, it becomes prominent. So that is what. And about, so whether that is incidental or whether that's something that's very intrinsic, and about what function then does the fantasy have. And I think that's a very interesting thread to think about, that of course it's undeniable that there's a shift in Missouri and there's a shift from the registers, but why that shift? And that is what I said at the beginning, that it's so very difficult to pinpoint to what is this film about. Is it romantic? Is it political? Is it about banality? Is it about mundane, humdrum, everyday affairs of life? What is it about? So in my reading, I would read that injunction of the moment of fantasy into this otherwise, what Neep also called as this very documentary mode, as a commentary. And commentary about what then? That is the next question. A commentary about what exactly is love within such context. So I think the function of that fantasy. So of course, I mean, I would also make a different make an adjacent argument that even if you do not think of what this function does, even if you do not, if you think if you move away from this idea that the scene has to be functional, then we can also accept that this scene is just there for our experience, for being drawn into their little moment of conjugal togetherness. So, and in this reading, we withdraw the very idea of the fact that the scene has to be functional. But if we think that, of course, this scene is there and it's there for a purpose, so then what is the functionality? Then I would think that it kind of underscores the argument about the film, which is what is love in such times, or how can one think of love in such times? So yeah, I think that's my quick response. But of course, that's not the only reading, and I would love to know if there are other ways that all of you have thought about how that specific moment is functional to the otherwise the narrative of the film otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add a point, or is it too late in the night?
Yeah, please go ahead, Ajanta.
You know, there's
Never too late. Yeah.
just in the context of the discussions that we've had so far, and really, Tarkeshwar's kind of a comment set me off. So there is, if indeed the city is the protagonist of the film, I was thinking of the great film by Satyajit Ray called Mahanagar. Right, and there, of course, very emphatically, Tarkeshwar and Sridhar sir, what this lady does is that she engages with what is happening outside, right? And that is also a meditative film. So what I think, in some ways, the kind of unrest about what is exactly avant-gardist about this film, I'm not quite sure. And then, there's this whole kind of debate in the 70s and really the 70s, which I'm sure you will know, Trinashan, Kolkata 70, etc. In terms of experimentation with form, right? And there was this whole thing about how you could actually document the people that the police had disappeared through some of the marches, etc., that Meenakshi was kind of filming. So I am what here exactly as Tarkeshwar and Sridhar and all of many people have pointed out, here to me in some ways also, I think now looking back at it, this is a completely depoliticized couple. And precisely, there is no attempt to, in some ways, question the system. And this word aspirational, it's of course a hugely loaded word. So in what way is it, if we are broadly kind of placing it in the rubric of political cinema, I'm not quite sure how or why. Because, the Mahanagar thing and the whole formal experimentation debate, God of Meenakshi and 70s, etc., Gautam Ghosh, that's completely elided. Right? So I'm just wondering how in what tradition of Bangla cinema you're placing it with. I'm sorry, I have not seen Stanio, Shambad and the others, but just kind of, random reflections.
Okay, Amrita, you want to respond?
Yeah, of course. That's a very interesting comment. Yes, I mean Satyajit and Mrinal Sen films, the Calcutta trilogy, their urban films, even Pratidwandi, even Interview, they have an engagement with the city. Yes. Does this film have a similar form of engagement? No. But will that preclude or would that foreclose to think that this film also engages with the city? I would say no, but about whether I would read it as a political film. I would definitely read the injunction of such slogans, the TV announcement, as making a political commentary. And that's what I said, that how do we read this film? Do we read it as romantic? Do we read it political? What is the vantage point from which we should read? Because there are definitely romantic vantage points from which we can look at this film. Does this film entirely erase the context in which the romance is situated? Definitely not. And that's why it gives a sense of when it is situated and the job crisis. And therefore, it has this engagement, this commentary on what's happening beyond the couple. Like you said, it's depoliticized couple. They are not engaging with it. But it doesn't mean that the audience or the viewer is also kind of curtailed off from recognizing that these are very powerful things also happening simultaneously. About yes, so that is my response about the political aspect. I wouldn't read it as a romantic film. I said I wouldn't also read it as a political film. What interests me is rather that this film makes us have these questions. And what interests me rather is that the film has these trajectories, these impulses, these very specific oral and visual cues that make us think of the questions of romance and make us think of the questions of politics. And did I lose anything else about then how is it engaging? I would say it's engaging in an experiential domain. It might not engage with the same spatial points that Satyajit Ray or Mrinal Sen engaged with, and I would say that's unique because you don't engage with the same spatial points that have been so powerfully rendered already. So then you move to a different dimension of engaging with the city. And I would read this dimension as definitely the oral and the experiential, more along the lines of the sensory stimuli than in the sense of the specific architecture of the city. So yeah, that's my quick response.
Okay. Thanks, Amrita. And anyone else, any last comments? Okay. Generally, when the discussion goes beyond 11, Amrita, it's a sign of a really successful discussion session. So thanks very much for suggesting this really engaging film for all of us. Thanks also for very patiently and very interestingly taking up and drawing out some of the implications of what everyone had to say in today's discussion. Thank you all for joining today. It's been a late night and we're all not, I hope all of you are doing well. Geeta and I are not particularly well, but hopefully by next week we'll all be better and bring another round of interesting film for discussion on Talking Films Online. Thank you all and very good night.
Thank you, Amrita. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next
Thank
week.
you everyone so much.
Thank you,
I love the
Amrita.
discussion, and
Good
Nikhil
night.
and Geeta, I hope you recover very soon and very
Thank
well.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.